I should have known from the moment I stepped out of the taxi that tonight was going to be a disaster wrapped in glitter and dipped in champagne. The cold night air nipped at my cheeks as I adjusted the strap of my paint-splattered tote bag, feeling every inch the misfit standing before the towering gates of Archibald Sterling's mansion. My heartbeat was doing an impression of a jackhammer, and if the nerves were visible, they'd probably be flashing neon signs saying totally out of place here. The limo doors opened with a flourish, disgorging a parade of gowns that shimmered like liquid starlight and tuxedos, so sharp they threatened to cut the very air. The guests drifted by in clusters, their laughter tinkling like crystal chandeliers. Voices carrying the kind of practiced ease that only endless practice and bottomless bank accounts can buy. I tugged my cardigan tighter around me, the fabric suddenly feeling threadbare and inadequate. My plain canvas shoes felt like clown slippers amidst a sea of glittering stilettos and polished leather. I was here for distraction and inspiration, if I was honest, hoping maybe the spectacle would spark something new in my art-starved brain. Instead, it was doing a pretty good job of sparking a full-blown panic attack. As I hesitated near the velvet ropes, trying to decide whether to make a discreet exit or just disappear into the shrubbery, a tall man in a sleek black suit approached. He looked me up and down with a calculating glance, then without a word handed me a small, black walkie-talkie clipped to his lapel. "Your security, right?" he said, his voice low and matter-of-fact. I blinked, the device cold and heavy in my hand. Sure, I stammered, feeling my face flush with a combination of shock and embarrassment. He nodded once, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, as if this was all perfectly normal. Good. We could use an extra pair of eyes tonight. Before I could protest, he melted back into the crowd, leaving me clutching the walkie-talkie like it was a ticking bomb. The absurdity of the situation hit me in waves, me, Ellie Harper, broke art student and professional klutz, suddenly deputized as security at the richest man's gala in the city. It was like being cast in a play without a script, costume, or any idea of the plot. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and reminded myself that sometimes the best inspiration comes from chaos. So, with the faint hope that no one would notice my paint-splattered clothes or the way my hands trembled, I stepped past the velvet ropes and into the ballroom. The interior was a riot of opulence. Golden candelabras flickered with wax dripping like liquid gold. Marble floors stretched out like frozen lakes, reflecting the swirling crowds in dizzying patterns. A string quartet played a lively tune somewhere near the grand staircase, their music lilting through the air like a soundtrack to a world I'd only glimpsed in magazines. I tried to look alert, standing by a massive pillar as if I had any idea what I was supposed to be watching for. My foot caught on a velvet rope, and I stumbled forward, catching myself just in time. A few heads turned. I offered a sheepish smile that probably read more like a grimace. "You okay there?" whispered a voice behind me. I spun to see a woman draped in emerald silk and dripping with pearls. Her sharp eyes sparkled with amusement. "First time at one of these, isn't it?" "You could say that," I admitted, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. She laughed, a warm, melodic sound. "I'm Penelope Wexley. Don't worry, darling. Everyone's pretending to know what they're doing here. Just keep your eyes open and your smile ready." Her flamboyant confidence was a balm to my nerves, and for a moment, I dared to think I might survive this night. But as I clutched the walkie-talkie, its crackle and hiss reminding me of the role I'd been thrust into, I knew this was only the beginning of a very strange evening. Just then, the head of security, a stocky man with a stern face and eyes that missed nothing, strode past. He glanced at me, a flicker of suspicion crossing his features before he moved on. I swallowed hard. If he found out I wasn't supposed to be here, the embarrassment alone might be enough to send me running. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Tonight I was security. Whether I liked it or not, and if this night was going to be a disaster, well, at least it would be a memorable one. I stood awkwardly near a marble pillar, the cold smoothness pressing against my back as if it were a lifeline. My hands, clammy and jittery, fumbled around an invisible walkie-talkie, fingers twitching nervously as I tried to embody the role I'd never auditioned for. The chandelier above was an elaborate beast of crystal and light, scattering rainbows across the polished floor like a kaleidoscope gone rogue. Somewhere in the distance, a violinist plucked a note that hung in the air like an unanswered question, and the hum of genteel chatter buzzed around me, an ambient reminder that I was a fish gulping air in a pond far too posh for my liking. The first rule of blending in, I thought, was to look confident. The second was to not trip over your own feet. I was failing spectacularly at both. A waiter swept past, balancing a tray of champagne flutes that shimmered like liquid gemstones. I tried to look like I belonged, standing tall and scanning the crowd as if I were actually paid to keep an eye on things. My gaze landed on a pair of guests performing what could only be described as an elaborate greeting ritual, a dizzying dance of bows, curtsies, and compliments so over the top they could have been scripted by a satirist. "Lovely ensemble, darling," one whispered, fingers fluttering over the other's jewel-encrusted cufflink as if inspecting precious cargo. "Oh, just something I threw on between yacht inspections," the other replied with a grin that spelled trouble and tax evasion in equal measure. I chuckled quietly to myself, the sound barely a whisper in the sea of polished voices. This was the absurd theater of the wealthy, and I was smack dab in the front row, pretending to be part of the stage crew. Then came the arrival of Mrs. Penelope Wexley. She didn't just enter a room. She stormed in like a glittering tempest. Her gown was a shimmering cascade of sequins and feathers that caught every glint of light, making her look less like a person and more like a walking disco ball. She surveyed the room with eyes sharp as a hawk's, the corners crinkling with amusement and calculated curiosity. Well, if it isn't the usual suspects," she declared loudly enough for half the guests to turn and offer polite, if wary, smiles. "I do hope the champagne is as bubbly as the conversation tonight." Her laughter was like a bell ringing through the hall, clear and unapologetically loud. I watched as a few guests shifted uncomfortably, as if they were suddenly aware of being insects under a magnifying glass. Mrs. Wexley's presence was a jolt to the atmosphere. She was the social equivalent of a cat knocking over a priceless vase, not malicious, exactly, but utterly incapable of subtlety. I tried to keep my posture, patrolling the marble corridors like an imposter security guard, but my nerves were a tangle of static electricity. My feet betrayed me, catching on a velvet rope and sending me into a flailing stumble. I caught myself against a nearby table, nearly knocking over a silver candelabra. The waiter nearby looked at me sideways, eyebrows raised in silent judgment. "All good here," I muttered, flashing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. As I edged my way through the crowd, I couldn't help but eavesdrop on snippets of conversation. There was talk of an upcoming yacht auction, a scandalous divorce, and a new art installation that apparently involved live flamingos and interpretive dance. The absurdity was staggering, but beneath it all, I sensed a current of desperation and pretense, like everyone was playing a part in a drama only they understood. In a quieter corner, away from the sparkling chaos, I muttered security protocols to myself, none of which made any sense. How was I supposed to remember codes and procedures when my brain was busy rehearsing how to not look like a complete fool? Mrs. Wexley suddenly appeared beside me, a sly grin tugging at her lips. "Darling, if you were going to pretend to be security, you might want to keep those eyes open," she whispered, her voice dripping with a mix of mockery and genuine advice. "There's more going on here than just bad wine and bad manners." I blinked, startled by her sudden appearance. "Thanks," I said, unsure whether she was friend or foe. "Oh, I'm both," she replied with a wink. "Just keep your wits about you, Ellie. Gala nights are not for the faint of heart." Her cryptic words sent a shiver down my spine. Maybe this night was going to be more than just a distraction. Maybe it was the beginning of something completely unexpected. As I straightened my back and forced myself to breathe, I realized that if I was going to survive this gala masquerading as someone I was not, I'd have to learn the art of standing still and standing out without losing my mind. And so the night stretched before me like an endless runway, glittering with peril, promise, and the absurd comedy of errors I was about to stumble through. "Here goes nothing," I whispered to no one in particular, stepping deeper into the glittering madness, ready or not. The moment I spotted Jasper Quinn, the head of security, my heartbeat did a sort of tap dance that was entirely out of sync with the polished waltz of the gala around me. He was a stocky man with a face carved from granite, eyes sharp enough to slice through the smoke and mirrors of this glittering madhouse. As I stood near the grand staircase, clutching an ill-fitting earpiece that had an unfortunate habit of slipping from my ear, I tried to steady myself. The marble beneath my feet gleamed like a frozen lake, reflecting the chandelier's opulent sparkle. But all I could focus on was the impending awkwardness of our inevitable encounter. Jasper's footsteps echoed heavily, a counterpoint to the delicate clatter of champagne glasses and the low hum of high society chatter. He approached with a scrutinizing gaze that seemed to weigh every detail of my plain, paint-splattered clothes and nervous demeanor. When he stopped beside me, crossing his arms with the kind of certainty that comes from years of being the person who's supposed to know everything, I felt the sting of unspoken judgment. "You're not one of the usual security staff," he said, voice low and edged with suspicion. "What exactly are you doing here?" I swallowed hard, the words tangling themselves into a jumble of excuses. "I am covering for a colleague," I stammered, even though I had no idea who this colleague was or why I was now pretending to be a security guard. "It's a temporary thing," his eyes narrowed. "Temporary or not, this is a high-profile event. We need professionals." I nodded, trying to appear confident despite the butterflies staging a riot in my stomach. "Understood. I'm here to observe and assist." Behind us, the gala swirled in its usual extravagance. Guests in sequined gowns and tuxedos flitted past, their laughter a tinkling soundtrack to the unfolding chaos. It was impossible to blend in when every eye seemed to be trained on you either out of curiosity or suspicion. I scanned the room, noting the flamboyant entrance of Mrs. Penelope Wexley, her excessive jewelry jangling with every step, and, more importantly, the furtive glances of two men in ill-fitting suits lurking near a velvet curtain. Those must be some of Maximilian's accomplices, their nervous energy practically radiated off them in waves. Jasper's gaze flicked toward them, then back to me. "Any idea who those two are?" "No," I lied smoothly, though my heart thudded in protest. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the room. One of the accomplices had tripped, sending a tray of hors d'oeuvres sailing through the air. The guests gasped, some stifling laughter, others shooting daggers at the clumsy culprit. Jasper's stern glare cut through the moment, and I seized the distraction to inch away, my clumsiness barely contained. I realized then that this night would be a test not only of my ability to survive, but of my capacity to read a room layered with deception, absurdity, and fragile social facades. Jasper was a formidable obstacle, a watchful eye that could unravel my flimsy disguise with a single question. But also, perhaps, an unexpected ally if I could prove myself. As the evening progressed, the dance of suspicion and survival tangled me deeper into the gala's absurd rituals. I found myself observing with sharper focus, noting who laughed too loudly, who whispered in corners, and who avoided the light. Every interaction was a puzzle piece in the chaotic mosaic of this gilded world, where appearances meant everything and truth was often the greatest joke. Jasper and I kept a wary distance, a silent agreement hanging between us. Trust was a luxury neither could afford just yet. But in his scrutinizing gaze, I glimpsed the possibility of something more, a partnership forged not out of friendship, but necessity. And as the night darkened, so too did the shadows where Maximilian's plans lurked, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had stumbled into a game far beyond my usual realm of paint and canvas, and the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. But if this night had taught me anything so far, it was that sometimes the most unlikely players could change the course of the story, if only they survived long enough to tell it. And survive, I intended to, even if it meant keeping one eye on the glittering guests and the other on the watchful, unyielding gaze of Jasper Quinn. The ballroom shimmered under a constellation of crystal chandeliers, their light scattering like errant stars caught mid-fall. Murmurs of admiration and the soft clinking of glasses filled the vast, opulent space, a low hum of wealth and whispered secrets. Ellie Harper stood near the grand display where the priceless pocket watch was to be showcased, an artifact so rare it seemed more legend than metal and gears. She felt absurdly out of place, paint stains on her plain dress a silent declaration of her outsider status amid the silk and satin. Her fingers twitched nervously, the subtle twitch barely noticeable, but enough to betray the storm inside her chest. She had barely gotten the hang of pretending to be part of the security detail, her eyes darting suspiciously at the guests, the kind who seemed to glide effortlessly through the evening's ritualized absurdities. Her heart was doing its own frantic dance when the room's atmosphere shifted abruptly, a collective intake of breath. A gasp sharp and sudden enough to slice through the hum like a knife. The pocket watch, that jewel of the evening, was missing. A charged silence fell over the crowd. Eyes widened, heads turned, and whispers erupted like wildfire. Ellie's gaze snapped toward the empty pedestal where the watch had been, now glaringly void of its precious cargo. The chaos that followed was immediate and deafening, accusations flung like confetti, frantic questions shouted over the growing din, and the unmistakable rise of panic in well-coiffed voices. A stream of footsteps approached, purposeful and brisk. Ellie's stomach lurched as she saw Jasper Quinn, the head of security, his face pinched with suspicion. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked on her with a weight that felt like a vise. "Miss Harper," he began, voice low but edged with steel, "what exactly are you doing here?" Ellie's mouth parted to answer, but no words emerged. Her mind scrambled for a plausible excuse, any thread of truth to cling to. She was supposed to be invisible, unnoticed, not a suspect. Yet here she was, standing too close to the scene of the crime, her nervous energy painting a target on her back. Before she could respond, Mrs. Penelope Wexley swept in, a swirl of extravagant fabric and glittering gems. Her sharp eyes flicked from Ellie to the empty display and back again, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Oh, darling," she purred, voice dripping with theatrical concern. "This is simply delicious!" A mystery at the Sterling Gala. And who better to get caught up in it than our very own new security guard? The crowd's energy shifted again, now tinged with the thrill of scandal. Ellie felt the weight of their gazes, the prickling heat of suspicion crawling up her neck. Her heart pounded louder, drowning out the murmurs, the accusations, the mounting tension. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small, stubborn voice whispered, "This is far worse than you imagined." She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that panic was a luxury she could ill afford. The real thief was still out there, somewhere in the glittering maze of corridors and whispered lies. And somewhere beneath the chaos, Ellie needed to find a way to survive, to clear her name, and perhaps, just maybe, to catch the culprit before the night unraveled completely. With a clumsy step forward, she raised her hands in a gesture of peace, trying to inject humor into the tense moment. "Well," she said, voice cracking slightly but laced with self-deprecating charm, "looks like I'm not just blending in anymore." The room seemed to hold its breath, the night's farce just beginning to unfold in earnest. Ellie's accidental plunge into the world of high society crime was no longer a possibility, it was her new reality. And somehow she had to find a way to turn the chaos into her canvas. As murmurs turned into pointed questions and whispered suspicions, Ellie's eyes scanned the room, spotting Maximilian Crane in the crowd, his sly smile never quite reaching his calculating eyes. Somewhere beneath that polished surface was the thief, the puppeteer of this glitzy disaster. And Ellie, the unlikely security guard, was about to find herself tangled in a web far more complicated than she'd ever drawn. The first slip had been made. The game was underway, and for Ellie there was no turning back now. The sudden disappearance of the watch had shattered the gallus polished veneer, and Ellie felt the weight of every accusing glance. It was as if the air itself had thickened, buzzing with tension and the unspoken question, who could be trusted? Jasper's interrogation was relentless but not unkind, his concern for the billionaire's prized possession evident beneath the suspicion. Ellie's awkward attempts to explain only seemed to deepen the fog of doubt around her. Every trip, every stammer, every nervous glance was a nail in the coffin of her innocence. Meanwhile, Mrs. Wexley flitted around the room like a social vulture, her sharp tongue and sharper eyes peeling back layers of gossip and hidden motives. Her flamboyant presence was both a curse and a blessing, stirring trouble, but also offering Ellie unexpected clues and a sliver of hope. As Ellie navigated the swirling chaos, her mind raced every detail a potential hint, every slip a chance to redeem herself or sink deeper into suspicion. The night was far from over, and the first slip was but the opening act in a comedy of errors that would test her wit, courage, and very identity. The moment the priceless pocket watch vanished, slipped from its velvet-lined case like a shadow fleeing daylight, the gala erupted into a symphony of gasps, whispers, and the sharp clatter of fine crystal tumbling to the floor. Ellie Harper, still clumsy and awkward in her ill-fitting guise as a security guard, found herself thrust into the center of an unfolding farce that felt equal parts absurd and urgent. Her first instinct was to chase. It might not have been the smartest choice, but it was the only one her panicked mind could summon. With the elegance of a newborn giraffe on roller skates, Ellie lunged forward, her foot catching on the hem of a silk tablecloth. The sudden tug sent a towering champagne pyramid wobbling like a ship in a storm. One by one, the flutes cascaded down in a crystalline avalanche, shattering with a sound that seemed to punctuate the room's collective gasp. "Oh dear," Ellie muttered under her breath, cheeks flushing a shade that clashed disastrously with her paint-stained shirt. She scrambled to her feet, eyes darting toward the retreating figure of the thief, or more accurately, the thief's shadow darting through the crowd. The guests, a peculiar mix of glitterati and social climbers, seemed momentarily frozen, their polished veneers cracked by the chaos. Lady Wexley, a vision of flamboyance in a gown festooned with sequins and jewels that caught the chandelier's light like a disco ball, let out a sharp, amused laugh. "My stars, dear Ellie," she called out, her voice dripping with a mixture of mockery and genuine interest. "You do bring a certain vivacity to security work." Ellie wasn't sure whether to be insulted or grateful for the unexpected ally. With Mrs. Wexley's distracted attention momentarily diverted from the champagne carnage, Ellie used the brief pause to scan the room. The thief's accomplices, a trio of twitchy men in tuxedos that looked a size too large, were slipping through the crowd like shadows, their nervous glances betraying their amateurish nerves. Determined, Ellie pushed forward, narrowly avoiding a collision with a silver-haired gentleman whose monocle nearly flew off in surprise. The mansion's ornate corridors became a gauntlet of hazards. Priceless paintings watched impassively as Ellie tripped over a Persian rug, sending a porcelain vase teetering perilously before settling safely on the floor. Behind her, the hurried footsteps of the accomplices grew closer, punctuated by whispered curses and the occasional clatter of dropped objects. Ellie's heart hammered in her chest, a chaotic rhythm that matched the slapstick unfolding around her. Mrs. Wexley, not one to be left out of the fun, glided after Ellie with an exaggerated grace, occasionally tossing pointed comments that only added to the confusion. "Careful, dear!" "The chandeliers are not part of the obstacle course," she quipped, eliciting a nervous smile from Ellie despite herself. The chase wove through the mansion's labyrinthine halls, each turn a new misadventure. In the narrow corridor lined with abstract art and expensive sculptures, Ellie's foot caught on a loose tile. She flailed wildly, arms windmilling in a desperate attempt to regain balance, before crashing into a statue that emitted a hollow, ominous thud. "Watch the art!" A voice hissed nearby. Jasper Quinn, the head of security, appeared from the shadows, his stern face a mask of concern and disbelief. "Ellie, this isn't a playground." "I'm trying!" Ellie panted, scrambling to her feet and clutching at a nearby tapestry for support. Jasper's lips twitched, betraying a hint of reluctant amusement. "Keep moving." Pressing on, Ellie's breath came in short gasps as she rounded the final corner into the mansion's ornate library. The rich scent of leather-bound books mingled with the faint aroma of aged wood and dust. Here, the chase reached its crescendo. One of Maximilian's accomplices, a young man whose nervous twitch had become more pronounced with every step, found himself cornered. His eyes darted wildly between Ellie and the heavy oak door behind him. "Got you," Ellie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The man's shoulders slumped, and he muttered something about the watch's location information that could turn the tide of the night's chaos. As Ellie caught her breath, Mrs. Wexley swept in behind her, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Well, that was most entertaining," she declared, "and rather informative, too." Despite the bruises to her pride and the paint-splattered state of her clothes, Ellie felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this madcap night wasn't just a disaster waiting to happen. Perhaps, amid the chaos and clumsiness, she was beginning to find her footing. And if she could survive this, maybe, just maybe, she could survive anything. But the night was far from over, and the shadows still held secrets waiting to be uncovered. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ellie tightened her grip on the stolen watch's trail, ready to chase down the next twist in this improbable adventure.